Pope Francis made news on July 9th by announcing a consistory to create 21 new cardinals. The consistory is scheduled for September 30th, just prior to the start of the Synod on Synodality. The consistory will be Pope Francis's ninth, and the 21 new cardinals, 18 of whom will be eligible to vote in the next papal conclave. Now, the Vatican's also published the names of delegates participating in this Synod on Synodality, including lay people who will for the first time be permitted to vote in a Synod of Bishops. How will all of this affect the shape of the Roman Catholic Church? Here with their reaction and analysis is the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief at thecatholicthing.org, Robert Arroyo, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray. Gentlemen, great to be with you once again. I had to bring you back because of all this breaking news and people frankly saying, we need to hear from the Posse. So here we are. Gentlemen, as I mentioned, this will be Pope Francis's ninth consistory, which will bring the total number of cardinal electors to 137. Of that total, 9 voting cardinals were created by St. John Paul II, 29 by Benedict XVI, and a whopping 99 will have been created by Pope Francis. Robert and Father Jerry, before we get to specifics, what are your thoughts on the sheer numbers involved here? And doesn't this essentially guarantee that Francis's agenda will carry through the next conclave? Bob.
Yeah, it could. I wouldn't say so. You know, there's a long-standing joke in Rome that people who go in as papabile, as electable as pope, come out as cardinals. I mean, and it's been verified many times. I mean, after all, the people who elected Jorge Mario Bergoglio as pope were all appointees, basically, of John Paul II and Benedict XVI. I don't know what to make about the overall composition of these cardinals. I've looked at it as carefully as I can, especially the new ones. There are a couple that are in a kind of an ideological vein, like Cardinal McElroy was in San Diego. But a large number of them, and of that 99 that you mentioned, the growing part of the College of Cardinals overall has largely been, even under Francis, coming from Asia and from Africa. And those cardinals, it seems to me, are generally not on board with kind of the progressivist ideology that some people fear is coming down the line. So look, it could guarantee kind of a continuity of regime, the way that John Paul II led to Benedict. But on the other hand, there's this wild card that the peripheries are not like the developed world, and they may bring a very different perspective to the next conclave.
Father Jerry, anything to add? I mean, perhaps we should look deeper than the numbers. And when you do look at these men individually, particularly those from the far-flung peripheries, they are hardly in the model of Pope Francis.
Yes, I agree with what Bob said. And I'd also note that, as the Synod process has been going on for the past year and a half, it's been tightly controlled by Rome. And I think that's a sign that they don't trust people on the peripheries to necessarily buy into the agenda from the start. So I would think at any conclave to come when Pope Francis is no longer the Pope, we're going to have a reexamination of the situation, comparing it with what was happening under the previous 2 popes. And my hope and wish is that the mission of the Church will be highlighted, not the idea that somehow an administration, a pontificate and administration whose policies have to carry over to the next. We're talking about promoting the gospel, and things have to be analyzed in light of that.
The newly appointed prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, Archbishop Victor Manuel Fernandez, is a cardinal designate. Now, Bob, Fernandez has once again expressed in a recent interview his openness to reconsidering the Church's prohibition on same-sex blessings, saying in a Spanish interview this week, quote, "It wouldn't be bad to rethink it in light of everything that Francis has taught us." What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's just silliness, frankly. We know from dogmatic teaching, and we know this from going back to St. Paul in Romans and many other elements in our tradition and in the Bible itself, that homosexual activity is a sin. It's simply a sin. Now, all people commit sins, and we have to recognize that, and we need to be merciful and forgiving toward sinners. But to bless some sort of relationship that is sinful in and of itself, just makes no sense whatever. And I think that however much you want to invoke Francis's desire to be merciful and pastoral toward all sinners of various kinds, to me, especially coming from somebody who's now going to be the head of the doctrinal office in the Vatican, this just seems to me to be very troubling and maybe a portent for some very large problems to come down very soon in the future.
Yeah. Father, the doctrinal office under Francis has already condemned the blessing of same-sex unions, but now Tucho Fernandez said in the same interview, quote, "Many say that it, the ban, does not have the flavor of Francis in the way it is drafted and in some of the expressions it uses. God does not and cannot bless sin. In this matter and in others, we will have to heed what the Pope asks of me at the end of his letter, which is for the dicastery's documents to embrace the recent magisterium." Now, Father, first off, why is the Church defying the doctrinal office, the normal magisterium, under Pope Francis? And must every doctrine now be subject to whether it has the smell of Francis?
Well, this criteria is obviously not complete or adequate. Yes, we take into account each pontificate's magisterium, its teaching. But this is not like the administration, in a political world where things change overnight once an election is held. So the doctrine of the faith, as Bob pointed out, is consistent and clear. Homosexual activity is intrinsically disordered, and homosexual inclination likewise is intrinsically disordered because it's leading people into actions which are, in and of themselves are offensive to God, apart from any intentionality on the part of the people committing those sins. So the Pope himself signed a document in which it stated that homosexual blessings are not possible. And now Fernandez is telling us that the Pope doesn't mean that. We only take him at his word. That's his magisterium. This is causing confusion. And I have to say, this is playing into the hand that Father James Martin's been playing ever since he wrote that book, Building Bridges, because he says that the language of the Catechism about intrinsic disorder is cruel and needs to be changed. And I have a feeling that this is going to be on the agenda at the Synod, and this is going to be a moment of crisis for the Church. The Church cannot teach that what is immoral can be blessed, and it certainly can't teach that what is disordered is somehow now simply differently ordered or a variation, but not really offensive to God. That's false.
Yeah, and it looks like in a recent interview, Fernandez is even opening the door to changing that formulation in the Catechism, correct?
That's correct. He gave an interview to Quotidiano Nazionale in Italy. It was posted today or yesterday on the website, in which he said that, the language of the Catechism hurts people and that Francis would certainly speak in a different way. Now, if he is signaling to us that there's some kind of movement to change the language of the Catechism, this has to be vigorously opposed because it will only confirm people in sin. It will give the impression that Catholic doctrine is subject to change. Catholic doctrine is not subject to change. The truth is the truth. It's handed down by God. It's witnessed in the scriptures, in the natural law, the constant teaching of the Church. So we can't say that sodomy is good. And if that's what Fernandez and others are trying to push the Church toward, they must be resisted.
Bob, there is an interesting thing at play here, that you have Pope Francis's magisterium. This was Cardinal Ladaria under Pope Francis, who said one thing: you can't bless these unions. Now you have his successor, Fernandez, the new head of the doctrinal office, saying, wait, you might be able to bless these. This is very confusing within the one pontificate. I mean, to say nothing of what of the previous popes. Is it every pope is just to be, all of his teachings are to be cast out depending on who holds the office?
Well, we saw that 35 years of John Paul II and of Benedict XVI have been largely reversed in these 10 years of Francis's papacy. Look, there was an interesting lecture that was given at this outreach conference that Father James Martin organized at Fordham University in the last few weeks, in which Juan Carlos Cruz, who was a victim of sexual abuse and is a homosexual, claimed in a public lecture that the Holy Father told him that that document from the CDF, then the CDF, that said that homosexual unions could not be blessed, that he read it but did not sign it, and he was pained by it. And Juan Carlos Cruz even says it was fanatics, that was his word, fanatics inside the Vatican who were blocking the idea of blessings of homosexual unions. Look, this, I don't know what they're about here because they are themselves confused and confusing. But given the impression that, yes, we can kind of be nicer to people, okay, that there's nothing wrong with that, but that somehow this also kind of almost half implies that maybe someday down the line it'll be possible to reverse this teaching, that simply is not true. And if that happens, we are in open heresy and open schism from the past of the Church. I hope that this confusion does not persist over years now with Archbishop Fernandez in the DDF, but I greatly fear that that's where we're headed.
Father, as long as we're talking about Archbishop Fernandez, the new doctrinal officer of the Vatican, he admitted to the Associated Press that he, quote, made mistakes in his handling of a 2019 case of a priest accused of abusing minors. Now, Fernandez has been accused of protecting the priest, but has denied that until now. He says that if it were today, he would have acted very differently and that his performance was insufficient in this matter. Again, this is the man who will ultimately be in charge of protecting doctrine and prosecuting these abuse cases in the Church. Father Jerry, what do we know about this case, and why would Fernandez not be subject to Pope Francis's own strict law that calls for the immediate removal of officials who cover up or don't deal properly with sexual abusers?
Well, I'm glad that he admitted that he didn't do what he would do now in the past, but, you know, this reminds me of damage control, partial hangout, admitting things. No, if it's true, as he says he didn't do things right, what didn't he do right? He should give a full accounting of how he handled the case, the reasons he did some things, because the victims in this case are quite vehement, and they claim that he protected the priest. That priest, by the way, committed suicide on the day he found out that he was going to be arrested, which can be interpreted very easily as an admission of guilt. But no matter what, Archbishop Fernandez was in charge of the diocese at that time. And now if he says he did something wrong, let's get the details. And let's see if the victims feel satisfied with what he says. I'm sure we have not heard the end of this story.
Bob, where is true justice, or is it only applied selectively? I thought the Vatican had a zero-tolerance policy toward clerics who covered up or didn't properly deal with sexual abusers.
Well, look, we've seen lots of inconsistencies in this papacy as a whole, and I guess to a certain degree it affects all papacies because the Church is such a big and complex institution. But, you know, I have to say that globally, one of the things I find very disturbing about the appointment of Archbishop Fernandez, and of course the Pope has a right to appoint whoever he wants, and even if there are problems in the past. But one of my main concerns here is that the person who you could hope would be a kind of a sign of unity. The Pope is the bridge builder, the pontifex, but the people he assigns to these very high offices should also be people that we can trust to bring us together on these disciplinary matters and on doctrinal matters. And I think that what we're seeing instead is that we're exacerbating the situation on both ends of that. And one of the reasons why we have law, I'm not a canon lawyer, and Father Murray, of course, will want to comment on this, but the reason we want to have law is because we don't want favoritism, or we don't want the persecution of people unjustly. We want to use the law to give us a sense of what is just in given circumstances. And if we're going to have a law that bishops who have covered up should, if not be removed or blocked from further offices, at least explain themselves, well, then we ought to adhere to that, or we should just declare that we don't care about what canon law or the disciplinary law of the Church is.
Well, and Father, you can't have an exemption if you're a friend of Francis. I mean, you know, I'm thinking of Cardinal Maradiaga, who is also going to be attending this synod, by the way. And this is a guy who, his right-hand man, his auxiliary vicar, was accused of all kinds of sexual malfeasance. And it just gets brushed away.
And then we have the famous case of Father Rupnik, who very reliable evidence against him, the direct testimony from victims that he was committing grievous sexual acts against nuns. And yet he was never punished for that. He was excommunicated, but it was lifted almost instantaneously. And it was never known that he was excommunicated until it came out in the revelation on the media. So we do have a standard of justice, that has not been applied evenly. Vos Estis was the document that the Pope issued, was designed to guarantee greater transparency and also regularity of law, so that bishops would be held accountable for the crimes that they covered up, just as the criminal priests would be held accountable. But it hasn't been applied over the worldwide scene with any kind of consistency. And the Fernandez case would be very interesting to see, as I said earlier, what do the victims think about this apology? I think we have to hear from them.
Yeah. I want to get to some of the other new cardinals just named. Archbishop Christophe Pierre, the Apostolic Nuncio to the U.S., has been elevated to the College of Cardinals. Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Pier Battista Pizzaballa. Also, Father Jerry, what do these two men bring to the College of Cardinals? Why do you think they were elevated?
Well, I think in the case of Archbishop Pierre, he's been a very loyal nuncio to Pope Francis, because a number of his speeches to the Bishops' Conference annual meetings, he's more or less insisted the American bishops that they have to adopt the style of Francis, as it's popularly known. He's been very faithful in that. In fact, he's beyond retirement age. He's 78. Nuncios retire at 75. So Pope Francis has left him in his position longer than the usual 5-year term. The Patriarch of Jerusalem, I'm very happy that he was named, because, of course, the mission of the Catholic Church to Catholic faithful and to all the people in the Holy Land is of great importance. And being a cardinal gives him greater prestige. So I think that was an excellent nomination.
Yeah. Bob, I want to get your reaction to these other appointees. Bishop Stephen Chow of Hong Kong. Now, he's a Jesuit, a successor of Joseph Cardinal Zen, the heroic cardinal who's been on this program many times. Bishop Chow has just been named a cardinal. Now, he's an advocate of the ordination of women. He favors cooperation with the CCP, with the Communist Party. How does this advance the faith of the Chinese? And what's the message here, do you think?
Well, I think the message is it's more of the same. We've said many times on this show that we can see what the Chinese got from this, what we still call a secret agreement with the Vatican, because we don't know what is in it. We know what the Chinese got, but we don't know what the Church got out of this. And it just seems that there's a willingness to extend an infinite length of patience for the Chinese to show some sort of respect back toward the Church. I think that his appointment in Hong Kong was itself already problematic. I think that Cardinal Zen, I don't remember this exactly, but I think he was upset that Chow was appointed there. And to raise him to a cardinalship with the baggage that you talk about, and especially his closeness to this communist regime, which has been nasty not only to Catholics, but to Muslims and to Protestants. In my view, this just communicates to the Chinese that they have nothing to fear from the Vatican. But well, I guess we'll have to stay tuned and hope that something changes along the way.
Father, also among the new cardinals is Auxiliary Bishop of Lisbon, Americo Aguilar. Now, he recently said that, and he's running World Youth Day, by the way, which is happening this summer. He said about the goal of World Youth Day, quote, "We don't want to convert the young people to Christ or the Catholic Church or anything like that at all. We want that a Catholic or Muslim or Jew or a non-believer can say that he is what he is and be okay. The difference is good, and the world will be better with it." He later clarified these words, saying World Youth Day is an invitation to all the young people of the world to experience God. Father, I have seen apologists say that this is consistent with Benedict XVI's rules for interreligious dialogue, but is World Youth Day a youthful interreligious dialogue?
No, it's supposed to be a gathering of Catholics to inspire them in the faith. The whole purpose of World Youth Days was to ensure that the younger generations would not drift away from the Church. So, I was shocked, just as everyone else was, that a Catholic bishop, soon to be cardinal, would say that World Youth Day is not about bringing people to Christ and the church. Well, then why are we spending all the money and having it? We don't believe in youth jamborees where we all take a pledge to love each other and be nice to each other. That's all good, but let the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts do that. But the purpose of the Catholic Church is the salvation of souls. I mean, where in the world do we hear bishops talking about salvation of souls, engaging in the heroic struggle against temptation and the devil, and then living the glory of the sacramental life following the preaching of Christ? World Youth Day always concludes with a papal mass, which is beautiful. It centers on Christ. So to tell us that I'm not interested, the World Youth Day is not about bringing people to Christ and the church, this is shocking. This should never have been said. I regret that he did it, and his apology was only partial. Again, we're not into proselytism. This isn't proselytism to invite people to go to confession and adore Christ in the Eucharist and hear some talks about Catholic doctrine.
Yeah, I have to say, Bob, I read this and I thought, well, hold on. You represent the Church of Jesus Christ, presumably, and you're a link to the apostles. Now, is that true or false? Because if it's true, then you have an obligation to go and promote your brand, right? You want to promote the gospel of said Jesus Christ. But there's a lot of confusion. I mean, this looks like a global citizens concert, which, frankly, you get bigger stars and better music. So why would you go to the World Youth Day? I'll let you respond.
Yeah. Look, the Catholic thing appears in several languages, and one of them is Portuguese. And our Portuguese translator knows this bishop in particular, and he's written about him recently. And he said that he's actually not that bad a guy. So in one way, the story is that this guy who's not so bad says this thing that our translator says was ill-advised, to say the very least. But I think the larger lesson, or the larger story here, is this man would never have said this unless that there had already been created this sort of sense of a synodal church where everybody who wants to walk with us is welcome to walk with us, except we don't know where we're all walking to. And the fact that you start to bring in people who aren't exactly on the Catholic path that's been defined over centuries and millennia, if you really are inviting those people, and you're going to obviously lose the direction that you're intended. So to me, I think that it was a combination of a man who spoke carelessly and ill-advisedly, but also because under any other pope, he would never have said this. And Francis has induced this confusion and actually encouraged people to talk in those terms.
Yeah, I have to say, I have a simple question. Do you have the truth? If you do, give it to young people and everybody else. If you don't, then just don't have anything. Stay home. Close the doors. You've become the museum church you often talk about. I want to move on to the announcement of the names of those invited to be special delegates of the Synod of Bishops in October. Now, the Vatican released their list on July 8th. The delegates are chosen by bishops' conferences, the Eastern Rites, curial leaders, plus 120 personally selected by Pope Francis. Now, in all, that's 363 people who will be allowed to vote in the Synod. 54 of those are women. Now, in addition to the voting members, there'll be 75 experts invited to the assembly to share their input. These are a few of those cleric delegates personally chosen by Pope Francis to vote at the Synod. They include Bishop Stephen Chow of Hong Kong, China, Cardinal Blaise Cupich, Archbishop of Chicago, Cardinal Wilton Gregory of Washington, D.C., Cardinal Robert Walter McElroy of San Diego, Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, the Prefect Emeritus of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston, Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez Maradiaga, and Father James Martin. Bob, what do those names indicate about the direction and vision of this synod? Cardinal O'Malley, Cardinal Mueller are in the mix as well, but two of these things are clearly not like the others.
Well, I think we know that Mueller is sort of he's a token representative, and because he's been pretty much shut out of the Vatican ever since he left the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Look, the interesting thing here is look at what our American bishops did. They had the right to nominate certain delegates to send to Rome for the synod. And they universally nominated very solid, kind of moderate bishops. It's Cardinal Dolan, Kevin Rhodes from Notre Dame, Bishop Barron from Minnesota, Bishop Flores from Texas. These, and Archbishop Broglio, who's the president of the Bishops' Conference right now. So these are five men who are, very good, solid churchmen. You may disagree with them about one thing or another, but they're sort of moderates, and we'll have an interesting conversation. The other five that you just mentioned, Sean O'Malley accepted perhaps, are very ideological. And it's clear that on the one hand, we've got the locals who know what we need here in the Church in the United States presenting one vision, and then another vision being selected by Rome. And some of the lay people selected by Rome, like Father Martin and also a woman from Minnesota, I think are pretty much on the fringes of what Catholicism is in this day and in the past. So we've got this tension of these two different visions, and we know at least where we think that the Holy Father and his staff are overweighting the people that he's allowed to choose of his own free will.
Yeah, but you see, this is my whole point. You can't say, it would be like me saying, I want to hear everybody's voice, Bob. I want you to bring everybody you can. I'm going to listen to everyone and let them listen to me. We're going to have a great big listening session and share our truths, what the Spirit is calling us to. Oh, wait, Bob, here's the list of the people that you are allowed to bring in. I mean, that's not really truth in advertising. I'm sorry. This is an invited guest list of elites. That's what this is. Father Jerry, we spent a good deal of time talking about many of these men over the years. These are just a few of the bigger names. Your thoughts on where the Pope's mind is in these choices?
Sure. Well, it's obvious that people propose doctrinal change, pastoral change to favor tolerance of sin in the life of the Church. They're getting favored. Father James Martin is probably the most shocking appointment, but I shouldn't be shocked because the Pope has favored him up to this point. But his main contribution to the life of the Church is the attempt to say that homosexuality is a condition created by God. God is pleased that people are homosexual, and he would like the Church to soften up on its approach. Now, what does that mean? In the end, it means changing the doctrine. Cardinal McElroy is in the same school of thought. Cardinal Supik is in the same school of thought. So what we have here, and it's very sad to say, I said this about a year and a half ago, the Synod on Synodality is turning into the Synod on homosexuality. Now, what are we talking about here? The Catholic Church has a liberating truth about human sexuality, which is life-giving, and it does not include approving mortal sin. But that's what these pressure groups and then people who support them in the hierarchy and priests like Father Martin, it's very, very sad. The German bishops are in a similar condition. Bishop Batzing is going to be at the Synod. He's a proponent, again, of homosexual blessings and change in doctrine. Cardinal Hollerich, Cardinal Mark. It's hard to believe, Raymond, that here we are talking about the most vital issue in the life of the Church is to declare that we've been mistaken for 2,000 years about a teaching that is biblical and clear, that sodomy is a sin and should not ever be approved by the Church. But that's what's going on now.
With same-sex unions, or blessings rather, seemingly high on the agenda, the Synod nominations do seem to reflect some of the thinking you've been talking about. More than one of the delegates named are openly pro same-sex blessing. Cynthia Bailey Manns, a Catholic activist and member of St. Joan of Arc Catholic Community in Minnesota, not parish, is a promoter of adoption by same-sex couples. Sister Vizquia Valladares, a Nicaraguan nun living in Spain, also promotes the blessing of same-sex unions within the Church. Bob, is the deck stacked on this issue at the Synod?
Well, it is, but then again, as I keep saying, the delegates from the peripheries may make a big difference. The thing that I find most striking about this is, look, we are three Americans. We know the American Church rather well. How in the world do they find this person from this St. Joan of Arc community in Minnesota? There's got to be a network in Rome, or a network via someone like Father James Martin that picks an extremely obscure and extremely radical person. The same with this Nicaraguan nun who ends up in Spain. And I think this reflects that there was a much deeper, much broader coalition in Rome, other than simply Francis himself, that seems to be preparing this sea change in Catholic teaching. And I think not only on this, I think we're going to see other things that are going to be pressed. Maybe we're going to go back to the unicorn of women deaconesses and married priests. Again, that seems also to be, these are all secular things that have been around for 60 or 70 years. And yet they seem never to go away, even though they have been dogmatically defined over and over and over again.
Father Jerry, how can these discussions go forward canonically? We talk nearly every week about settled doctrine that, at least in the Francis era, seems rather unsettled. And with Fernandez in charge of the doctrinal office and now this lineup at the Synod, is everything up for grabs here?
Well, the mere fact that lay people are going to vote at the Synod means it's no longer the Synod of Bishops, because by definition, a Synod of Bishops is made up of bishops, and there was an exception for a few priests, but that has to do with the sacrament of holy orders, which priests and bishops share. So now with lay people there, this is the Synod of Bishops and non-bishops. Essentially, it's functioning as a political gathering. The selection basis included a 50% representation among the non-bishop candidates that were nominated by the different continental assemblies. They had to be 50% women. Now, that's like the European Union. This has nothing to do with how the church functions. If the only people who knew stuff about specific topics were women, then they should all be women. And likewise, if all men. The idea that somehow you appoint someone because they were in the process, that was another criteria. You had to be part of the process from the beginning. So if I went to a meeting a year and a half ago, suddenly I'm a candidate to be sitting next to the cardinal prefect of the doctrine of the faith and my vote equals his. This is absurd. Canonically, this is all wrong. It shouldn't be happening this way. It's not historically justified. It's not theologically justified. We question, they talk all the time now about we have to find positions of power for women in the church, power meaning decision-making properties. Well, what that concerns is the nature of the episcopal authority in the church, which by divine commission is given only to the bishops. It's not given to other people. So this is a big, big mess, very discouraging because stacking the deck with who's there, but then just creating an institution that has no history, no relevance according to Catholic doctrine. If you want to have a synod of lay people, go ahead and have one. Listen to them, but don't pretend that they exercise the same authority as bishops in the life of the church, because they don't.
Yeah. No, well, there's a twofold thing. You nailed it when you said this is a political veneer to it. But my take on it, when I first heard that they were introducing all of these lay people, when it's only bishops, there's some discretion, and the bishop understands the weight of his words, and internal conversations are kept in that internal forum. When you have lay people running around, listening and taking notes, you now have a vanguard of media operatives that you can send out to pepper the media around the world with this controversy or that, this leak or that, and lean into issues that you want to have more attention and demonize positions or individuals who you don't want to hear from. That's what this is designed to do. And mark my words, that's what we'll see much more of. I fear Cardinal Mueller was right. This is a hostile takeover of the Catholic Church with a freestanding institution that has never happened in the history of Catholicism. Never occurred. Bob, papal biographer and occasional attack dog Austin Ivory has been named as a synodal expert facilitator. I guess Father Jerry and your invitations must have gotten lost in the mail. Given the speed at which all of this is happening, what does this tell us about the Pope's mindset at this moment? And does the haste tell us anything about the condition of his health and the way he sees it?
Yeah, there's been a lot of speculation about the appointments to the Synod and the large number of new cardinals that are being made, that this may reflect a Pope in a hurry, knowing that his health is not good. He's 86 years old. And there may be an attempt, as Archbishop Fernandez says, to make sure that the changes that the Pope has introduced are permanent. They're irreversible is a term that he's used. Well, I said earlier, and I want to repeat again, that we know that the 35 years of John Paul II and Benedict XVI have been eminently reversible, and the things that can be reversed if a new pope comes in or a new spirit kind of enters into Rome, I think everything can change again. My worry about all this is about the specifics, of course, like homosexuality, women priests, etc. But it's also this, that people in the modern world feel themselves carried away by this tide, this uncontrollable tide of change, what some people have called liquid modernity, that there's nothing to hold on to. The tradition used to be something that used to stabilize us. All this is giving the impression, if not to the most faithful Catholics, but people in general in the world, that the Catholic Church, like everybody else, can change depending on who happens to be in the apostolic palace at a given time. That's not Catholicism. Catholicism is a dynamic tradition, which means it adapts to each period that it's in, but it remains faithful to its tradition, and also, most importantly, faithful to the teachings of Jesus. And I think once we lose that fidelity and that stability, we're even leading people into more troubled waters than they've been in up till now.
Father Jerry, talk about that impermanence. I mean, the church was always the rock. I mean, that's what it's created to be and upon. The rock in the world, the unmovable, absolute, eternal teaching and perspective of Christ in that world. You have the last word.
Yes, no, and this is actually one of the probably the most crucial issue that is going to be in the forefront is the binding force or binding nature of divine revelation. Does divine revelation have a binding force, meaning what was taught by Christ and has always been taught by the church, can that change? And the answer, of course, is no, because God is truth. The truth of God revealed is for our salvation. We have an apprehension of the truth with an accurate understanding of it, thanks to Christ. And he said to the apostles, "He who hears you hears me." That authority was then transmitted to the bishops. And the Pope is the safeguard of orthodoxy in the church. He was given the command to strengthen the brethren. So, as Bob said, liquid modernity is really the assault that's been going on ever since the Enlightenment on the whole nature or notion that you can have something that's permanent and true and unchangeable. And the whole wave of pre-synodal actions and now these latest appointments, they point to a group of people who don't believe that. They do not consider revelation to be binding. Rather, it can be changed. They'll call it, they always do, they'll call it a development. We're going to develop the teaching. Well, development does not mean denying. And if you change a teaching, something is good and may say now it's bad and vice versa, that's betraying revelation. And then really, what's the center of the whole Catholic Church? It is Christ. We are all servants of the Lord, and his word gives life to us. The Father revealed his word through the Son, and then the Holy Spirit guarantees that the church will teach that word. So people come along and try to change it. They're really unfaithful shepherds, and now lay people are agitators who are working with them. We have to pray. We have to pray that this synod does not devolve into this, because, quite frankly, you can't cut a deal where everyone's going to be satisfied. Either you teach the teaching of the church and the radicals go home sorry, or you say, no, the door's open to change, and then we realize, my goodness, we are in a serious, serious problem here. We cannot give in to these forces of radicalism.
Well, one thing I know for certain, there'll be a lot of people covering this synod. We are going to be ground zero, must-see TV throughout this synodal process, because others, I think, are looking to shave the edge off or try to, hide this or that. We don't do that here. We're here to tell you the truth, as Mother Angelica wanted. We've been trying to do that for so many decades, and I'm thankful you all are here for the ride. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. For commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, visit thecatholicthing.org. Thank you both. See you soon.